EGA for hosting me here. I have a bit of bad news, and I hate to start a talk with bad news. But nevertheless, I have no slides. I'm unarmed. I have no slides. So we're not doing PowerPoint. The screens will stay blank. Captain, you're a better man than I. I never figured out how the thing works. So we're talking about information sharing in a global environment. And the US has asked me to help at NATO to try and get a cyber common operating picture. DHS calls it a COP, common operating picture, for 28 nations, the 28 that comprise NATO. And then there are also the 50 which comprise all of the NATO partners. So looking at a common operating picture for 28 nations, NATO is a military alliance. They are very, very familiar with battlefields in the physical sense. They know about troops and planes and ships. Cyberspace is a brand new field for NATO. And as a military alliance, NATO is moving further and further out into cyberspace. So NATO, in America, Department of Homeland Security, has US CERT. And US CERT, you can go to their website, uscert.gov, and they provide information about threats and vulnerabilities and attack vectors, even signatures. NATO has NCERT, which is the NATO CERT, and that's taking data feeds from the 28 nations that are the NATO members, and they flow into the NCERT, so that provides a resource for the 28, and it's based on the information sharing agreements of the 28 as part of NATO. Because as the captain just mentioned, we have a need to share information at the unclassified level, at the sensitive yet unclassified level, whatever designation, some level of protected information, and then at the classified level. Well, in NATO, there are different classifications, just like we have. Most common is NATO restricted, which is restricted to the 28 members and not releasable outside the alliance. So we've got all of this data that's hopefully flowing into Brussels, where the NCERT is. NATO's Cybersecurity Center of Excellence is in Tallinn, Estonia. It's in Estonia for a rather symbolic reason. I see a head nodding. That Russia reached over one day and turned Estonia off. And we know there was a Russian cyber attack, but what we didn't really evaluate too much in the local press is that the Russians turned Estonia off. The Baltic republics, newly independent after the Soviet Union's big going out of business sale, all put in brand new infrastructure. So they're very, very high tech in Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Russia, Moscow, even though the Soviet Union is gone, there still is a mentality in Moscow that, hey, we are in charge, regardless of what happened geographically and politically. Does anybody know why the Russians attacked Estonia in cyberspace and switched the nation off?
Because they were trying to remove the statue.
Correct. There was a bronze statue of a Russian soldier in Tallinn that was very important to the ethnic Russian population of Estonia. The Estonian government chose to remove it. Riots popped up all across Estonia, and the Russians got involved in Moscow and said, okay, you may be an independent nation, we're still the big guys, and switched them off. So NATO has located their cyber center of excellence in Estonia, and Estonia is indeed, of course, a NATO member. So looking at global information sharing, the first point is all of us nations, everybody, it doesn't matter whether we're allies, trading partners, adversaries, everybody is connected in cyberspace in some way or another. So there is this massive interconnectedness. And all nations that are interconnected in cyberspace face a fairly common set of adversaries. And this is not politics between nation states, but there are criminal organizations which plague multiple governments and interactions. In fact, there is a nasty relationship in cyberspace that's not talked about very much, and that's between Mexico and Afghanistan. Now, what would Mexico have to do with Afghanistan? Drugs, right. The drug cartels are pretty much destabilizing the Mexican government. So we've got drug cartels that are going crazy. We know that Mexico is a producer of marijuana and poppies. There are areas in Mexico that do grow poppies, but not enough. So where does opium come from? Afghanistan. Well, who runs the Afghanistan opium trade? Pretty much the Taliban. So you've got the Taliban dealing with the Mexican drug cartels, and not only we have supply and demand, but sales, well, there are a lot of very large criminal organizations in Russia. You're laughing, but there are in Russia. And one of the things they do, among a lot of bad things they do, they sell the damn drugs. So now you have this really awful triangle between Mexico, Afghanistan, and Russia. And a lot of nations are simply on the receiving end because in selling illegal drugs, it filters down. Your neighborhood dealer doesn't really know where their stuff comes from. It's a huge, long chain. So international crime is common to nations that are active in cyberspace. Criminal activity happens via cyberspace. These guys aren't mailing each other things, and they're not on the phone, and they're not big users of satellite phones. So they're working through cyberspace. You've got the bad guys, the Taliban in Afghanistan, talking with the Mexicans, who are communicating with the Russians, and then physically this stuff flows back and forth. We've got global terrorist organizations, and this is not just one nation, quote unquote, hacking another nation, but there are global terrorist or hacktivist or independent organizations which are politically active via the internet in a global way, regardless of what nation. One year at, I think last year at DEF CON, I was speaking with some of the young people. At DEF CON, the hackers conference, they play Spot the Fed. I'm wearing shorts and a Hawaiian shirt, which is what I usually wear to the office in the summer. It took about one day, and a kid comes up to me and says, "You're a Fed." I said, "You're right, you got me." He said, "What's your name and what agency?" I said, "My name is Grover T. Muldoon, United States Central Intelligence Agency, at your service." He says, "Whoa, I got a CIA guy." I said, "Yeah, you did." And but what they wanted to talk about was fascinating. The DEF CON people, and kid is not the right term because they're of all ages, there is a separate subculture that uses the internet as a means of conducting their lifestyle. There are entire hidden worlds on the internet, like the anonymization protocol Tor. And there's an entire world inside Tor. There's a website called Silk Road, and you can look it up. It's on Wikipedia, and you can buy guns, drugs, people, whatever. There's a mercenary exchange, but there's this entire hidden world. Now, these internet-based cultures of people are consumers of service. Their culture and their lifestyle depends on unrestricted access to the public internet with a capital I, and the ability, they use the term geolocate, to pick up a foreign IP at will. I myself have been the Sister Agatha home for unwed mothers in Sofia, Bulgaria, when it's been convenient. I never actually checked to see if there was such a place, but I always hoped there wasn't. So these people are, and Anonymous filters into this, Lulsec filters into this, they are hoping that the US will get more proactive in cyberspace in an offensive way. To use the politest term I can think of, they believe the US are being sissies in cyberspace because we always seem to be on the defense in terms of cyber attack. We have our antivirus products, we update our signatures, we do continuity, and that's something that was mentioned, and I am a continuity planner. But we're always on the defensive, and yet these people who are on the cutting edge of technology want to see us politically be on the offensive, and we're not doing it. So what are they doing? They're doing it themselves. There are armed, to use the term armed, a cyber weapon, and I would be really hard-pressed to define a cyber weapon for myself or anyone. But they're armed, and they are formed up into posses or militias, and they're going to attack those entities which they believe are hostile to their lifestyle of freely moving and communicating around the internet. And in the ones in America are oddly patriotic. They're patriotic in the sense of the guys in Montana and Idaho who dig holes, wave the flag, buy MREs, buy guns. They're patriotic, but they hate the government. Well, these internet folks are patriotic, but they're trying to defend the world they live in, which is much less the physical world, more of the cyber world. So we're talking about yes, sir.
So why are they hoping that we get offensive? Because you can destroy it.
Well, but they don't, they're this third party. So what happens is they perceive, they're dependent on the US internet infrastructure. And the internet in the US is basically AT&T, Verizon, Quest, now CenturyLink, Sprint, Level 3, XO, and there are 8 peering points or so within the US where the public internet peers. If there are outages of the public internet, that affects the cultural happiness of this group. So what they're doing is they're going on the offense themselves. So in the case of the Chinese, we talk about this and that, and the presidents of China and the US met and actually discussed the issue of cyber attack. They're going to whack the Chinese. But they're whacking the Chinese in an anonymous way. The Chinese are getting annoyed. They're tired of getting hit. They think it's us. They hit us back. Then we complain about them. And we're going back and forth, and there's this third party that neither one of us can see. So it's not a bilateral war, it's a multilateral war, only we can't see the other player. So looking at international cooperation, since there are problems which are common to all nations, the first step of international cooperation is information sharing. And how do we share information about adverse events? And with politics and all kinds of things aside, an adverse event is an adverse event is an adverse event. Stuxnet may have been bad for the Iranians, but the rest of the world kind of stood up and applauded. And before that, the Israelis took a more physical step with the Iranian nuclear program, dropped a bomb. Iran did not declare war on Israel. However, the rest of the world stood up and applauded. Not so many people want the Iranians with a nuclear offensive capability. So there is a commonality of goal amongst all of us. And the goal is to identify what the threats are on the global internet. Because geography in cyberspace is very fluid. The difference between here and there, between here and Canada, you have to show your passport at the border. I was just in Toronto at a conference. I have to show my passport, and at the time I had to wait in the enormous line. But the cyber border between the US and Canada is extremely porous because the Canadian ISPs, Bell Canada, Rogers, the rest are hubbed and peer in the US. So there is this transparency of cyber borders, and this happens all over the world. So at some point, we need to start talking about commonality of goals. And probably the largest goal that I'm going to talk about today is simply cyber defense. Offense is a topic that I don't think anybody should stand up in front of a microphone and talk about. But cyber defense, all nations that are connected via the public internet have a common defensive issue. It may be defending against different types of attackers or different groups of attackers or different nation states, but there is this common goal that there are bad things coming through, we need to defend against them. So what makes it hard? What makes it hard? And I'm a college professor, among other things. I teach at GW over here in the graduate program, cybersecurity, law, and public policy. So what makes it hard to share information between nations? Anybody? There's one word.
Trust.
Trust is one word. There's another word. The word is privacy. The word is privacy. Trust is a big factor, and trust is a component of privacy. Trust refers to whether you believe that the information you're getting from your cyber trading partner is accurate and reliable. This goes back to the CIA model in the CISSP handbook. Confidentiality, integrity, and availability. It all applies. So the thing missing from that model is privacy, which I guess falls under confidentiality, privacy. So attack data, and I used to be with a big telco. I was the chief security officer for Quest Communications, which is now CenturyLink. So they collect, CenturyLink collects all of this data. But what to do with it? Because it has customer IP addresses, it has demographics, there are things that link the attack data to a big bank perhaps, or a manufacturing firm. And how to scrub that stuff out, because it doesn't matter so much who. You know, we've got the who, what, where, when, how, and why. It doesn't matter so much who. So we can scrub out the demographics, the personally PII, the personally identifiable information. DHS refers to protected critical infrastructure information. We can scrub that stuff out, and what we want to know is what are the essence of the cyber attacks which are coming, and we want to find out if another nation, if Thailand, just to pick one, if Thailand is experiencing a major attack on their financial systems, can we be far behind? Or is there a pattern? Or are we observing that Thailand gets hit, Vietnam gets hit, and it's all attacking the financial sector? Well, if we track the progress, we can see maybe Western Europe, and it's coming toward us, or it's not. But we want to help use our abilities, like the very, very smart people that disassemble malware, and truly understand what the insights are and how these things work. We want to be able to share that. And since we're going to be really big people in cyberspace, we're going to stand up, and just like big kids, we're going to say, hey, we don't know everything. Nobody does. So what's the point of posturing? If we don't know everything, the goal is in collecting all of this information. And in looking at international agreements for information sharing, they usually fall into two categories. One is bilateral, which is between me and you. So a bilateral agreement is between the US and Canada, the US and Slovakia, the US and Russia, and we do have information sharing agreements with the Russians. That's a bilateral agreement. A multilateral agreement is where we have a single agreement in place with multiple nations. And in terms of NATO and the European Union, which is the awful muddy field that I play in, the difference between bilateral and multilateral can be very complicated. So US CERT in the US dealing with the NATO NCERT, that agreement is a bilateral information sharing agreement. The NCERT has multilateral agreements with all of the 28, all of the NATO members. And yet the US has bilateral agreements with members of NATO, particularly part of the Five Eyes, US, Canada, Great Britain, Australia, New Zealand. And we have very, very different rules for sharing information within the Five Eyes. But we've got 3 of those eyes as part of NATO. So looking at information sharing, we have a bilateral agreement with NATO NSER. And NATO NSER is hopefully taking data feeds from all different kinds of NATO nations. We also have bilateral agreements with Canada and the UK, and those are probably our friendliest agreements. We have agreements that are both bilateral and multilateral in a number of places, really all over the world. I was talking with a friend of mine from Symantec, and I don't plug vendors, but he was showing me their big operations map of where their sensors are, and I said, hey, you have sensors inside mainland China. He said, yes. I said, how do you do that? The Chinese, I don't think, would like that. He said, it's very easy. We give the data to the Chinese for free. They let us put the sensors in. Putting the sensors into China does not cost the Chinese anything in a strategic military, political military advantage, but there are sensors in China. And on a visit to Akamai over here in Northern Virginia, one of the guys there said, do you want to see the internet? I was like, how can you see the internet? He says, here, let me show you. He takes me in the command center, and there's this unbelievable set of screens, and it's showing data flows. And he said, here is 70% of the internet flowing right by you. So when we look at cooperation, what are we going to cooperate to do? I think the first step would be to cooperate to share data, and to share data in such a format that it's of value, it contains the attack information and the malware composition and specific vulnerabilities that the thing is looking for, without having any demographics. So I got it, but it doesn't matter where I got it. Here is what I have. And one of the things that's being developed right now, and there are projects both at NIST and at ISO and at NATO and at the EU, for a common threat interchange format. And that's, I don't know, there's no single name for it right yet. But a common threat interchange format by which threat information can be exchanged with other nations. It has some assurance of integrity, that we're not putting false or misleading information out. And of course, if the larger you make your sharing group, you get back into geopolitics where propaganda and all those things become tools. But if looking purely at information sharing, the first thing we need is a common interchange format. There are common formats that the large telcos in the US use to exchange threat information. And anybody know what an ISAC is? An information sharing group? Well, there's the IT ISAC, there is the multi-state ISAC, there is the financial ISAC. I've been part of the comms, communications ISAC, and scrubbed information flows into the ISAC so that it's distributed to all of its members without disclosing anything that shouldn't be disclosed. Because if you look at the volumes of internet traffic that happen over the major US telcos, you're looking at a considerable portion of the public internet. You then add in the big national PTTs, NTT, Deutsche Telekom, all of those things. There are a defined set. There's a finite set of big pipes that form the backbone of the public internet. There is an infinite number of other connections and branches and endpoints. And the endpoint of the network now is, it's kind of the human. The human is the endpoint of the network. And I think you could argue back and forth whether the human is the endpoint of the network, or, as the captain was describing, is the device the endpoint of the network. And where do things end? Do they end with the device, or do they end with the human?
Why is there an endpoint? Why isn't it a circular?
Well,
Actually,
actually,
taking information and stop it, and repeat it.
well, actually, it is. It is very circular. But we have a kind of traditional perimeter-based philosophy paradigm about network defense. And people like me that did not grow up with this stuff, we used the abacus that was hanging on the wall of the cave. But my kids, this is second nature to them. To them, there is no such thing as an endpoint, and you're quite correct. But we like firewalls. And we believe there is a validity to placing firewalls in different places. When firewalls first started coming out, I was, I was what, 12? No, I was older than that. Firewalls were viewed as a magic box. You slid it out, you plugged it in, and you instantly felt better. Firewall will take care of it. The stuff with rule sets, very, very complicated. But we still believe in perimeter defense. There are still firewalls. Many entities still try and maintain a hard edge, a hard perimeter. There's a firewall, and then there's a DMZ on the other side. And somewhere that we're still interested in maintaining hard edges, even though there really aren't any. And we have application level firewalls, we have VLAN level firewalls, we got all kind of firewalls. We got firewalls that come in a box, you slide them out. We've got firewalls that are software. We have firewalls that are social. We have all kinds of firewalls. A ubiquitous vendor like Cisco. Cisco has a sales team for AT&T. They also have a sales team for Verizon. AT&T and Verizon are competing for a contract. Cisco is ubiquitous to both of them, but those Cisco groups do not interact with each other. So they are firewalled. We use that term. They are firewalled off from each other. And part of that is information sharing agreements, and that we agree not to share information. When you get to the issue of classified information, the human is the endpoint. What prevents me from taking this from an unclassified discussion to a NATO cosmic level, it's a really cool name, but it's not that much of a clearance. I mean, what could be classified amongst 28 nations who don't like each other? If you've got Greece and Turkey and Moldova, Slovakia, Slovenia, what is going to be classified top secret? And cosmic is the NATO term for top secret. What could possibly be top secret amongst a group that doesn't like each other and yet belong to a common organization? So, but the discretion on sharing information, the bottom end, the bottom line is me. That I've been taught, I know the rules, and I've signed whatever agreements, and it's my discretion not to share inappropriate information and to compartment what I share for different groups. But it comes down to me. So information sharing on the global level And let's just take NATO, for instance. Looking at the NSERT, the NSERT is desperately trying, they're underfunded, they're in Brussels. They're desperately trying to get data feeds from all of the 28. Part of what's hindering that is this lack of a common interchange standard. And we're working on that. But we want to be able to share common threat information. And information in the continuity sense, we all know that information is data, if you want to go to the very basic level. Information is data which has been processed. Data processed is information. Information processed is hopefully knowledge. And the process doesn't necessarily involve automated machines or not. So information is an asset, but information is the only asset which has two values that I'm aware of. It's the only asset with two values. Information has one value when you hold it, and it's close, and it's safe, and you know where it is, and it has another much higher value when you lose it. Any company that has their customer mailing list, and I've met plenty on a single PC, they're fine. Are they going to upgrade that PC? Hell no. It's just, it prints labels. Whoop, it crashed. Where are the backups? Now, all of a sudden, that's the most important piece of information in the whole firm. So, information protected and kept is one value, information lost is a much higher value, and that's part of the continuity aspect. Another part of the continuity aspect is when we do share between nations in a bilateral way or in a multilateral way, when we do that, what provisions are in those agreements for continuity? So there's an internet disruption, for example, in Albania. And Albania has actually, since the fall of Ceausescu, become a very, very technically savvy place. So there's an internet problem with the pipes leading to Albania, the data pipes. They're cut off. How do we still share information, and how do we help the Albanians solve whatever their problem is? And the same applied to the Estonians. They actually had an off switch, and the off switch was flipped. So how do we communicate, and how do we share this threat information with the people that need it the most? So it gets to be a rather involved process as to what are the channels of communication, what are the alternate channels of communication, what are the alternate channels of communication. And we still have this, assuming we have a common format, we have this stuff, but it's of some value. Information is an asset of value. Now, if I choose to share with you something of value and I give it to you, and I go first. So if you're Albania and I go first, here's cyber attack information I'm giving to you. And we both signed this piece of paper. I'm going to go first. Would you please share yours with me? And could you please share yours with me in a format that I can understand? And you want to receive my stuff in a format that you can understand. You know what the biggest problem? Everybody talks about Chinese hacking. It's on the newspapers, it's in the media. Chinese hacking. The the two words. There's tons of talk about Chinese hacking. Has anybody said more than 4 words about why?
Why what?
Why are they doing it? Is hacking an activity like banging on the table? I'm obviously banging on the table. Why am I doing it? I don't know. So everybody's talking about Chinese hacking, but what are the motives? And there's very little, if any, discussion in the public media. I mean, there is in private places. But in the public media, there's very little, if any, discussion. Why? What? Yes, sir.
To steal intellectual property.
Yeah.
That's one goal.
Economic advantage.
Sir?
Economic advantage.
Yeah, that's another
Also
goal.
military targets as well.
Sir?
What about preemptive
Exactly.
disruption?
You pointed out probably the most least known one. There are 3 goals of cyber attacks. One is destruction. Human beings, for whatever reason, enjoy the act of destruction. We all do. It's built in. Otherwise, we wouldn't go to demolition derbies. Hockey games are better when the fight breaks out. All of that stuff. Cage fighting, ultimate fighting, street fighting. When there's a fight, people don't run away. They run toward it because they want to watch it. If I handed out cherry bombs, everybody would love to light it and see it go bang, pretty much. Humans enjoy the act of destruction. That's one motive. The second motive for cyber attack is theft, which is very simple. You have something, I want it. If you're not going to give it to me, I'm going to take it. So in the world of haves and have-nots, if you have money and I don't, but I have technology, I'm going to try and steal your money. Now, with China, there's a funny logic there, because China holds the greatest percentage of US debt. And that's well known. So why would the Chinese want to steal anything they believe they already own it? And why would they want to damage the economic infrastructure of their biggest cash cow? Because we are a circus circuit.
They want to be able to bring that technology in-house to do the manufacturing themselves so that they ultimately replace us and no one can.
True. What are we manufacturing, though? Not much.
I think it's
That's it. The answer was over here. IP.
yeah.
We're manufacturing intellectual property. But the Chinese want to bring it in-house, but isn't it to the Chinese advantage that we are as economically prosperous as possible so the money flows into China? So anything that would damage the flow of money into China would seem to be disingenuous.
So you also have a desire to project power.
Well, it's funny. With money and power, it's possible to have enough money. I don't know what that feels like, but if somebody does, I'd love to talk to you at the break. It's possible to have enough money. It is not possible to have enough power. The thirst for power continues and can never be satisfied, and that's something else in the human psyche there, along with destruction, the thirst for power. So we've got the 2 goals of destruction and theft, exfiltration, stealing of data. The third one is the one the gentleman mentioned up here, and I'll paraphrase that slightly, and that's command and control. The difference between a virus and a botnet is, and most people know this, but I'll just go ahead and state it, a virus is a computer program. It's pre-programmed by its creator. It's programmed as lines of code to do whatever it is it does, and then it's released in the wild. in a particular place, in general, in a very specific place, but it's a program, and once it leaves the control of its creator, the creator can't do anything with it. It will go and morph and do and whatever viruses do. It'll be 0-day, 100-day, 1,000-day, but viruses have no fly-by-wire. A botnet, on the other hand, is fly-by-wire. It's a drone. It's an RPV, a remotely piloted vehicle. Behind a botnet is a human operator. And while we have the ability with virus software to filter and look for virus signatures, which is really doing a table lookup, we don't have that ability for botnets. The only way we can detect a botnet is to anthropomorphically listen, and we listen for the beacon back to the bot master who's controlling it. And botnets are a long game. They're a long-term game. So you put the botnet out, it beacons back once and says, hey, I landed. It may sit for a long time. Bots achieve escalation of privilege by the controller moving them, again, anthropomorphically around inside a system, and they look for digital certificates, they look for encryption keys, and they seize those, and bots actually can take on the quality or the personality of the system user. So there's an awful lot of discussion in the press and lately in Congress about certain large manufacturers of computer hardware that are being sold at 40 cents on the dollar. They have exactly the same characteristics as the name brand computer hardware from a company headquartered in the US. But this company is headquartered outside the US, and it's one of several. So we know who we're talking about. But in fact, for a while, the company outside the US used the brand name. They got in trouble for that, and they got their hands slapped, and they stopped doing that. But if you're sitting as the CIO in a corporation, and you have the choice of buying equipment that's fully functional, the same as the high-price stuff, for 40 cents on the dollar, wouldn't you? I mean, it's hard to make the case because you can save millions, billions of dollars. And even if you isolate yourself from it, the government of Australia has chosen to isolate itself from a particular set of vendors. But the cyber supply chain, no matter who you connect to, and we talked about the interconnectedness of the world, you're still going to wind up with this stuff. So the equipment has been analyzed. It's been to Underwriter's Lab, it's been to Good Housekeeping. We've taken it apart, we've looked at all the code on every chip, and there are a zillion chips inside one box, and we found nothing. Suppose that the box is designed to sit there in cyberspace, and when the botnet comes along, just what if perhaps the botnet, instead of doing this, instead of impacting the device, the botnet is a software upgrade, and it does this with the device, and it shakes hands, and it reburns a few firmware chips. Then you have a device in cyberspace that you've purchased, only, wait a minute, it's not exactly what you purchased. It got a software upgrade you're unaware of. So now there's an alternate command and control presence within the device. And And that's the goal that was just mentioned. So achieving command and control, that's what Russia did to Estonia. Estonia got out of their corner. They got rid of the bronze statue. Russia turned it off. So perhaps any hostile nation state or any hostile group acting as a nation state or a large cyber actor is very slowly, carefully, quietly achieving alternate command and control within key parts of our infrastructure. The virus is a short-term game. You let it go and it does whatever it does, and somebody comes up with a signature and it's basically over. But a botnet is a long-term game. So what if that is a major goal? We all talk about exfiltration, about stealing, but what about this very subtly, quietly achieving command and control over an entire infrastructure? Is that serious stuff? So if we stay in our corner, that's good. If we get out of our corner, that's not so good, and the switch gets flipped off. So I am running out of time. I would like to take some questions if anybody feels like talking. But my final thought for all of you on the issue of information sharing in a multinational, multilateral, bilateral way in cyberspace is very simple. Very simple. What unites us is greater than what divides us. The common good is still the larger cause. And that is the reason to pursue the issue of data sharing and information sharing. Thanks very much.